Hello everyone, I'm Mike Cannici and welcome to Hometown Heroes. Well, last month we had Rich Marazzi on for part one of our part two special. We talked about his coaching career at Emmett O'Brien, his playing days at Ansonia High School. Well, tonight we go with part two and we talk about Rich Marazzi, the author, the sports talk show host, the writer, and of course his contributions to Major League Baseball. And Rich, I want to thank you for coming on again.
Mike, thanks for having me.
You know, it was an honor to talk about your coaching career and everything that we covered last month, and I am really excited about tonight. Now, Rich, let me ask you this. You stepped down from Emmett O'Brien in 1979. You had mentioned that you were looking to do something else, which obviously was writing. When did you start writing, the rules and for baseball and stuff like that? The lore of, what is it, the rules and lore
of baseball?
That's
my first book. Well, I think the first article or two I ever wrote about baseball, I belonged to the Society for American Baseball Research.
Okay.
And each year they put out a journal. And I submitted a couple articles involving the rules that were published. Then I got a job with a small company, magazine called Diamond Report out in Wisconsin.
Okay.
And so then one thing led to the other. And what I was doing when I got married in 1971, I began as a hobby. I was umpiring at the time, coaching basketball in the winters and umpiring baseball in the summers. And as a hobby, what I would do is I would try to collect odd stories about different plays.
Right.
And I just put together a collection of them. And Champ Winnick, who years ago probably did the first sports talk show here ever, at times called Valley Cable, he allowed me to research many of his old newspapers he had, and he lived in Shelton. And between that and writing the different ball players for information, I compiled a pretty good list of material that one night I said, you know what, I'm going to take out all these stories I have and put a rule number on them. And I realized I had probably, half to three-quarters of the rules in baseball covered with actual stories.
Wow.
So that became a book eventually. I took a took a rule and found a story to make the rule come alive. It's called The Rules and Lore of Baseball. Wow. And I went through my share of rejections with publishers, a few of them, and I even put the project aside for a while, and then got back into it, and publisher Stein and Day in New York published the book. And once you get published, it really helps after that to be published in other areas too, and
right.
It gives you a credential. And so that was it.
So now the feedback was pretty positive about this book, if I remember correctly,
oh, yeah.
right?
Very good, yeah.
Right.
Matter of fact, Nick Bremigan, who was an American League umpire at the time, was considered the best interpreter, the best rules interpreter. It was probably one of my original mentors when it comes to the rules as regard to that level. He helped me with the book. He contributed and called the book a masterpiece. So that helped too. You see, having an amazing umpire endorse it like that.
Now, how long did it take you to write the book, would you say?
Well, like I say, I began researching in the 70s without even knowing I was doing a book at the time.
Right.
So it's hard to say how long, but it took me probably maybe 10 years or so to accumulate the material that I had. I came across a story soon after I was married in 71 about a dead man who scored a run in a college game. What happened was, and I'll explain to you how it fits the rules even today. There was a runner on first base. It was a college game. The batter hit a ball out in the gap in right center, and the runner that was on first was rounding third and collapsed.
Oh, man.
And the batter thought that he turned an ankle or got hurt somehow or hurt a leg, whatever, picked him up and carried him, brought him into home plate, and he plopped him on the plate, and then he touched the plate, which is legal.
Right.
In other words, a runner could assist another runner. Well, come to find out, the player, whatever happened, really passed, and he was dead. So I thought that was a bizarre story, And I read about these different other things. So I just started taking things down. And then I realized that is a rule even today that, for instance, let's say a runner is going to be passing another runner. Well, either one, if they see each other, could hold the other guy up,
right.
As long as you don't pass them, you see. A coach can't do that to a player, to a runner, but a runner could. Most, even on the major league level, they're not aware of this. They think that you've got to stay away from each other. Because you don't see it happen too often.
Right.
I don't recommend people who are injured to have somebody pick them up and carry them around the bases, because you could risk further injury. However, let's say that that a runner is a foot away from a base, you need to push him a little bit. Say he just trips and stumbles. You're right behind him. You can do that.
Right.
So these are the kind of things that I do now with the major league teams that I work with. I explain to them that runners can assist other runners. That, that doesn't come out right and say it in the rule book. But when something is not covered in the rule book, it kind of gives a tacit approval that you can do it. And you got to read between the lines. Right. And so that kind of inspired me to go further into collecting the strange but true stories. And then I put them all together and it became a book.
It's amazing, though. You talk about, to come up with rules you just mentioned and stuff like that. There's a lot of research that is involved. And you didn't have access to the internet back then. There was no internet, stuff like that. So, you really had to research things. And I'm sure you had to spend a lot of hours, getting this book put together. And
I didn't really learn the rules till I became an umpire. I was on a Valley board, and I played college baseball. I didn't know the rules. I'll tell you something I did that was really ridiculous as I look back. And it helped break a school record for our pitcher. His name was Dan Zipkin, a very good pitcher. I played at State University of New York at New Paltz. And I didn't know, as a senior, I'm a senior in college. I'm 21 years old. I didn't realize that if the ball's in the dirt and strike three, if you scoop it up, that you had to tag the batter or throw to first. Right. I didn't know it. And I just threw the ball around the infield. There was nobody on base. I scooped it up and I threw it to our third baseman. Well, the coach from the other team says to the batter, take off, go to first. And he took off. Our third baseman threw it up in section 18, and the runner ends up on second base. Well, my coach, he tore me apart. He says, what is wrong with you? You should know that. You should do. I'm a senior. Right. Well, anyway, that inning, our pitcher, because he's credited with a strikeout on that, even though there's no out, he credit for the strikeout. Right. He struck out 3 other batters. So he struck out 4 batters 1 inning, and he struck out 17 for the game, which I still believe is a school record.
Wow.
And he's in the school's Hall of Fame. And I tell him that you're in the Hall of Fame because of my stupidity. I didn't know the rules till I became an umpire, and then I really got into it once I became a rules writer. I was hired by different publications, Yankees Magazine and others, Baseball Digest, USA Today, that kind of thing, and talking to umpires in the umpires room. And I learned the different angles of it, and I learned. I remember when I began umpiring, Jack Ahern would do our clinics, and guys around the valley like Jack Ahern and Dan Heffernan and Jim Carey. These are all my early mentors as far as the baseball rules go. When I became a young umpire back in 1966. Wow! And so that's how it happened. But I was always fascinated by the oddball stories because they're entertaining. These are the things that aren't your typical stuff, but they happen. When I go to camp with different teams that I work with, I always tell a story about a pitcher for the Dodgers, Dwayne Sanchez, who also pitched for the Mets at one time. Right. They were playing the Diamondbacks, and Louis Torrero hit a ball about 15 feet above the pitcher's mound, and Sanchez took his glove off like you do in the schoolyard and threw it up in the air, and his glove made contact with the ball. Now, when that happens, the batter automatically gets 3 bases. So anybody on base would score. You see, automatically he wants to go for 4. He's on his own. He goes at his own risk. So anyway, the ball's in the infield. So the play stopped. The umpire sent the runner to third base, and it was a rally, and they ended up winning the game with Diamondbacks. So I tell people, never assume that your players know the rules when you see Major League players doing this.
That's crazy.
Clayton Kershaw did it a couple years ago. The ball was rolling on the ground. He threw his glove at the ball. Now, why is anybody telling people these? You see what I mean? So when I go to camp and spring training, these are the kind of things I go over with the teams because nobody ever spends time talking rules with players and coaches. Umpires. It's all about umpires. But if you don't know the rules of the game, you got a problem.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. Would you say this first book put you on the map as far as your credentials, as far as getting, how did you start to get ties to like Major League Baseball parks and stuff like that? How did that come about?
Well, actually, I did a column for the Evening Sentinel called Let's Talk Baseball in the late 70s. Okay. At the time, I was doing a show here. At the time, it was called Valley Cable. I think it was called Sports Talk or Sports 10, I think it was, because it was Channel 10. And matter of fact, Liz Kennard, who's still here, we used to work with Liz. Wow, she's a great person. Yeah. And anyway, That's how it began, I guess. I began with after the book. It certainly gives you a credential. But when I was doing the Let's Talk Baseball column, Harry Katzman, who was the editor of the Evening Sentinel, he would get me a press credential for Yankee Stadium. So that's where I got my first press credentials.
Wow.
And after that, once they got to know me, one thing led to another, and I got to know the editor of Yankees Magazine very well, and he hired me to do a column, a rules column, and and so that's how it happened. One thing with, but I think the Sentinel was the origin of me getting press credentials.
That's pretty amazing. That's awesome. But let me ask you this now. You get this credential, you get the press pass to Yankee Stadium. Were you intimidated at all? I mean, I know you don't seem like the type of person that lets anything get to you, but I mean, the fact that it is, for all intents purposes, the baseball gods, New York Yankees, were you intimidated at first?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you walk in there and your heart is beating.
Right.
To this day, when I go to Yankee Stadium, I get excited. That's why I'm still doing what I do. To this day, I get excited. But in the early days, don't forget, I'm dealing with the George Steinbrenners, the Billy Martins, and all this stuff. And it certainly was intimidating. And it was, and I mean, Yankee Stadium was bigger than life itself.
What would you say your first year was?
Probably doing things in the early 81, 82.
So you were
doing
right
interviews.
there, when George was firing guys left and right.
Yeah.
I think Reggie was still there, and there was still tension there.
Well, Reggie wasn't. In other words, Reggie's he was there mostly in the 70s, 76 or 78.
I think 81 was his last year.
And I really began mostly right after that, so I didn't really deal with Reggie too much. Dealt with him as a visiting player, with the Angels, okay, but I never dealt with Thurman Munson and those guys, okay. But when George was in town, everybody was on their toes there. Even the people who work up in the press room, up in the upstairs in the press box area, everybody told them when George was in town, he was the boss.
Right.
And but what a great experience it was. I mean, to grow up as a young kid as a Yankee fan, and then be able to go in there and go in the clubhouse and cover the old timers games. And I actually, when I covered the old timers games, I enjoyed talking to the opponents as well as the Yankees, because those are all my baseball card heroes come to life.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You see,
and back then there wasn't the TV there is now. The only time you got to see those guys play was when the Yankees were playing them, or when the Red Sox were playing them. The Mets. Yeah. So I mean, what was your first encounter with George like, though? Was it one where it was a positive one? I mean, how? Well,
I remember the first time I ever interviewed George, I was doing a radio show on WICC called Inside Yankee Baseball.
Okay.
And I knew I couldn't get him live on the air. But one night I was and that's the way it would happen. I go down there with my tape recorder, and when you're freelancing, you don't know who you're going to come across.
Right.
You see, there are certain times where you can make an appointment with somebody, but most of the time you go there, it's hit or miss. Well, George happened to be in the dugout, and I introduced myself, and I said, "George, can I have a few minutes with you?" He says, "Sure." So we sat, I interviewed him, and I used it on my show. And I remember we got talking, and everything was going fine. And I said, "George, 10 years from now, where will the Yankees be playing?" Because at that time, he was always threatening to go to New Jersey, taking a team from New York to New Jersey. And he says, "Bridgeport, it's been fun knowing you. I love you. Goodbye." And that was at the end of the conversation. He did not want to get into any of the controversy,
Really?
And so, that was my first encounter with him. After that, I've had a couple others where we talked or interviewed as part of a group, but that was the only one-on-one I did. Probably the most spectacular experience I had was Mickey Mantle. I remember I used to go, I think Mickey was working for Sports Channel in the mid-'80s, 1986 or so.
Right.
As a commentator. And Mickey Mantle, when you're a kid growing up in the 50s, he was the guy, okay?
Everybody loved him.
He was the guy. And so you grew up Mickey Mantle, and he was special. Well, I used to go for a night game. I'd get there about 3:30, 4 o'clock. And I was writing for Yankees Magazine then, and I would go, they allowed me to go into their archives and take out the old scrapbooks of games going back to the 40s, 50s, and it was tremendous. I would go up there, and if I found a rule situation, I would write it out. And so if I did a column, on passing the runner, we'll say, I would try to go back and see if I had material that I could use from a game that happened years ago too. You see,
Right.
I relate the past with the present. Well, anyway, while I'm up there working, I saw Mickey on the field, standing by the batting cage, and I said, "Wow!" I says, "Let me go down." All they could do is say no. I learned a long time ago in life, if you don't make the call, the answer is always no. Right? Okay. So I went downstairs in the elevator, and I went into the catacombs of the stadium, and I went through the Yankee dugout. And as I was ready to ascend up onto the field, Mickey was coming off, and I introduced myself to him. And I said, "Do you have a few minutes for interview?" He said, "Yeah, let's go into the press dining room." He checked his watch, and we sat there for 10 minutes, interviewed Mickey Mantle, and one of the highlights of my life.
Oh, it had to be. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, Mick was a special type of player too. You know, they show that highlight a lot of Mickey Mantle Day, where
Yeah.
the crowd applaud for I think like 12 minutes. They just would not be quiet. You know, I always look back at that, but I mean, he was a special type of Yankee.
Yeah.
One that we're probably never going to see again. I mean, there have been some great Yankees, but I mean, he was like a celebrity. He really was.
And you never heard a teammate badmouth him.
No.
Even when Mickey was there, he would watch over and he would befriend the young players like the veterans.
Yeah.
He didn't play the role of the superstar. He was a very humble guy. He was surly with the press when he was a player. At that time,
Right.
I wasn't covering it. I was a kid myself. He was surly as a player. As years went on, he became much friendlier with the media, and I think he understood what the media was all about. But he was surly in the days he played, and he was a cartoon character, a great-looking guy.
Yes.
From the South, blonde, was he muscular? We used to roll our sleeves up like him, try to run like him. We were kids. He was just special. And so to be able to interview him one-on-one,
Had to be.
that was remarkable. I couldn't believe it. I said, well, here I am talking to Mickey Mantle. But you know what? Mickey had his dark side in his life. He had his demons, and he was human.
Right.
And I tell people, you know what? I admire Mickey Mantle as a player, but I wouldn't want to have him as a son-in-law or as a
Right. But you know what? The good thing about him is he told kids, don't be like him.
Exactly.
He knew he had those demons. There was always the rumor that he just thought he was going to die young because his father had, his brothers had. So,
Right.
I think if he looked back, he would have done things differently. But what I really liked about Mickey is I always felt that media was so harsh with Roger Maris, yet Mickey was always his friend.
Yeah.
There was no jealousy there, and that stood out to me the most about Mickey
They
Mantle.
lived together for a time in the '61 season. They lived together in Long Island.
I
area.
never saw Maris play, but I always said that, he would have been one of my favorite Yankees because you root for the underdog.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't want to compare the two, but I always thought when Tino Martinez had to replace Mattingly, those first couple of years, those fans were all over him because
That's right.
he wasn't Don Mattingly.
Yeah.
It was the same thing with Maris because Mickey was their guy first, and they didn't want Maris to break I'm sure some.
Well, they were both going for the record,
Right.
don't forget, in '61. And so if you played with a player for 5 or 6 years, and you know him personally, you're going to root for him.
Right.
Right? And Roger, he had played. Don't forget, Roger was the MVP in 1960 also.
Yes.
Okay, before he won the batting, before he had the home run title in '61,
Right.
he was MVP in 1960. So in '61, he had already had a good year under his belt with the Yankees. It's not that he was he just came on the scene late. However, Mickey was with Yogi Berra and Hank
Yes.
Bauer and Whitey all those years, and it's only natural to root for him. Not that they rooted against Roger, but they were rooting for Mickey. And then Mickey, late in the season, got an abscess on his leg and missed a lot of time.
Right.
And Roger just kept going. But it was tough for Roger. Roger was a Midwest guy, and to be under the bright lights of Broadway and the media attention, and to feel I hate to use the word discrimination, but I think he knew that his teammates, were kind of leaning on Mickey. And then Ford Frick wanted to put and it was asterisk in the rule book as
Which
regard
I
to
thought
the
was
'61.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I've met Roger. I've interviewed him, and I remember talking to him one time, and I said, Roger, you look back in your career. What part of your career do you think probably has been given the least attention? And he said, my defense. He said, I thought I was a great defensive player, and he was.
Right.
He had a great arm. He could run, and everybody links about him with the home runs, But Roger was a all-around player.
He actually was a contributor to the Cardinals winning the World Series in
That's right.
'67. You know, he had a great World Series that year.
Yeah.
So I was kind of, you know, I wasn't around then, obviously, but the stories you read, I was happy that he was able to win another championship because, you know, he really did take a pounding. I mean, everything you've read, and I mean, I don't ever want to go by the movie because the movie's always going to embellish stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it sounds like, you know, the press had it in for him too. You know, they were after him. And, you know, he didn't deserve that treatment, so I was happy for him. And, I mean, it sounds like he was a family man first, which I always liked about him the most.
He was, yeah.
So let's fast forward a little bit. 1989, you umpire Old Timers Day for the first time. And if I remember in '89, I think the Yankees played against former players from different teams. I remember Tom Seaver coming out with his Mets uniform on that year. That was a...
Gee, you know, I thought they were all. I could you're right because I remember Mike Epstein played that game.
So I mean, for your first Old Timers Day, you're seeing all these legends.
Yep.
You're getting umpire, and then you're seeing legends from different teams. I mean, what was that like? That experience?
Oh, are you kidding me?
And what
you know what? Most important, my family was there.
Right.
Having my wife and Richie and Brian there, that was the most important thing. Really, really was.
Right, because they were old enough now.
Oh,
too,
sure,
to
sure.
Really be
and
big.
that was a thrill just to have them there, and to do 16 of them. But the first game I did first base.
Right.
I remember Len Zondra came down. He was working for the Evening Sentinel at the time.
Yes.
And he did a big story on it, you know, and everything. And you know, I mean, I umpired many high school, college games that were a lot more pressure. But just the pressure being on the field was a big thing. And you think, I don't want to do something stupid, you know?
Right.
And but I was glad when it was. I anticipated tremendously, but I was glad when it was over too. I can't explain to you, but then after that, and I did the plate 3 years, which is good.
Yes. Did you have trouble that first night sleeping, knowing that you were doing that?
I remember the week leading up to it. I was hoping it wouldn't rain. I was hoping I hoped I was being in good shape, that my legs were good, my back was, you know, you were about every little thing. But it was a great thrill.
Yeah, it had to be. I mean, just seeing all those legends, and I mean, if you think about it, at that time, you still had Mantle, DiMaggio showing up, Phil Rizzuto. I think even Billy Martin, probably that was his last Old Timers game he would ever attend, you know? So, I mean, that had to be like a, you know, amazing time for you.
What was amazing is that
the team wasn't very good.
No, they weren't very good. But what was amazing for the Old Timers games, I would go there early with my immediate tag on, my credential tag, and I would dress with civilian clothes. And then maybe an hour or two later, I'd go and put my umpire uniform on, dressed in the umpire's room. And then later, they had us dress with the players. I remember one year dressing right next to Bill Skowron and who else was there that day? Bobby Richardson, I think. And I says, I can't believe this. I'm trying to think who I was with that day. Al Downing, a few other guys. But just been a great experience. What can I tell you?
Yeah, and if I remember the following year, Old Timers had come maybe 2 weeks after Bucky Dent was fired, and he got introduced that day, and it was a great moment for him after being fired. The fans, you know, were cheering him like crazy, and I thought that was real good. What position did you enjoy umpiring the most for Old Timers game?
Home plate and second base. Home plate because you know you're at home plate, and then second base you run around the outfield, like you don't believe you're playing center field. Ball's sitting in the outfield, so you're running.
Yes.
So you're doing stuff, you know. One of the great moments I had at Old Timers game was 1991. It was the 50th anniversary of DiMaggio's hitting streak, 56-game streak, and I remember it's the only year they ever did this. I don't know why they did it, but they introduced the umpires about halfway through the introductions. You know, the players line up on the first, third base lines.
Right.
And they caught me by surprise. And they introduced the umpires, and we went out there on the field. We stood near home plate. And now they had to finish doing the others, and they had to get to Mickey yet, and they had to get to Whitey and Yogi and Phil and DiMaggio.
Right.
Well, after all the inductions were over and we had the national anthem, I remember Joe DiMaggio was from about you to me away. And I just instinctively walked over to him and I said, Joe, thanks for the memories. And I just shook his hand. And my wife Lois was behind the backstop with a camera, and she got a picture of me shaking hands with Joe.
That had to be so neat.
Yeah, and you know, when it just happened that way. But that was one of my great thrills for the Old Timers games.
Right. And how did that come about, you getting an umpire Old Timers game? Was that offered to you to do?
Well, I was writing for the Yankees magazine. I did a rules column.
Right.
And I think one day I might have asked the editor, what are the chances of me ever umpiring a game? And he went to the higher-ups or whatever, and they said, yeah, bring him in. They had a guy from New York who would bring in a couple of amateur umpires with him. And so they added me as the fourth guy. And this guy's name was Leo. He was an old-timer. And so each year I'd work with Leo and then two guys from New York. And I would either do usually home plate or second base, mostly second base. And that's how it happened. And so being there 16 years, I logged about 47, 48 innings on the field, which is longer than some guys that come up for a cup of coffee and then they get traded or end their career. So I was happy.
Right. The way I see it is, obviously it takes a special person to be a Major League Baseball player. So if you don't have those skills to play it, this is the next best thing. It honestly is, that you're involved in it in some way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sometimes that's even more special. I mean, playing is obviously special, but being around legends like this and you get to umpire, an old-timers game like that, I mean, that's just something you take with you forever and you never forget.
When I was a kid, Mike, I wanted to play in 3 venues in my life. I wanted to play in the Haven Arena. At that time, there was an arena they called the Haven Arena before the Coliseum was built.
Yeah.
I wanted to play in the Yale Bowl, and I wanted to play in Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
I think every kid did probably who lived in the area at that time. Well, I got to coach in the Coliseum, and I got to write a book about Yale football history, and take a picture on the field in uniform. Okay, in the Yale uniform. And I got to umpire in Yankee Stadium. So in one sense, I've reached all my fantasies to a point.
Right.
And what can I tell you? I've been very fortunate. I've been blessed.
Right. Now let me ask you this. The DH topic, it comes up a lot. I've even heard the National League is considering it. I don't know how much truth that is, but they've been talking about that. What do you think about the DH? Do you think it's good for the game or bad for the game?
Well, overall, I think it's good for the game. However, I wish that both leagues would just be unified one way or the other. I think it's silly to play a World Series where you play 3 games with one rule and 4 games with another rule.
Yeah,
it just isn't right. And to me, it definitely is a detriment to the American League when they have to go into a National League park and not play with that DH anymore that they're used to playing with.
Right.
It's one less offensive player. I just wish they would unify it. If I had to vote, I'd probably vote in favor of the DH. Right. Somebody had an idea recently saying, well, how about if we did this, come halfway? How about if we just say you can use DH, but you got to take DH out when your starting pitcher comes out. So it adds a different kind of strategy to the idea. I don't know if that ever work. What if your starting pitcher comes out the first inning?
Right.
You lose him for the game. Well, whatever, but I don't think that'll ever happen. But supposedly Rob Manfred, the commissioner, did not really seriously bring it up for discussion at the owners' meetings. He had talked about it, but it was never anything owners ever talked about. So I think that came out early this year about possible DH in 2017 was a little premature.
I don't think it'll happen next.
I don't think it either. And matter of fact, the owner said they never even talked about it. Manfred, whether it was done at a meeting or he was done casually, informally, he talked about something that they would address, they would look at. Like he looked at the Pete Rose thing. Didn't mean they was going to bring him back.
I don't believe Rose will get in until he passes.
Oh, no.
I really don't.
He made a big mistake this year when he was asked by the commissioner if he had ever or if he's still gambling, and he said no. And then during the course of the interview that day, he admitted he is still gambling.
Yeah, he can't.
So you can't,
changes all the time. It's a shame because he was a great player.
Absolutely.
But, I mean, he's just the fact that he lied. I honestly think had he come clean in '89, he'd probably be in by now. But the fact that he's lied about it so much, they're never going to put him in. I mean, they're going to respect, Commissioner Giamatti's, ruling. And I just think, he screwed up everything that he had good by doing that. It's a shame.
I know for a fact that Bart Giamatti told someone that I know very well. He told George Grant. I can tell you what he told. George used to be a Yankee broadcaster.
Yes,
now he's with the
years.
Reds.
Yes.
In fact, George was a guest of mine when I did this show years ago. Or called this Yankee Baseball. Yes. And he told George, he said, if he would just come straight with us because they had so much stuff on Pete,
Right.
that we would take care of him in the future. But the Hall of Fame could still vote him in if they want. The Hall of Fame,
Yeah, that's a separate.
that's
thing.
a separate entity.
But they won't.
They won't, no.
They're very picky about everything.
Right.
You see with the steroids. One guy I've always been fascinated by, and he's never been a player, but to me, when you go to Yankee Stadium and you hear him on the intercom, you get goosebumps, is Bob Shepard.
Oh.
And you had the fortune of interviewing Bob, and in fact, I think you interviewed him on your TV show a few times. What was Bob Shepard like in person? I mean, he had to be a wonderful man.
Bob Shepard probably was the Moses in my life.
Really?
Oh, he was a very religious man, a scholar, an intellect, wonderful man. We were kids on the street. We would do the Bob Shepard announcements as we were playing ball. I interviewed him back for 1990 for my show at this station, and it was a thrill. And subsequent to that, it had to be about 15 years ago, I guess. I was at Yankee Stadium one night, and he called me into his booth and wanted to know if I'd be a backup to his backup. So he trained me to be a PA announcer at Yankee Stadium. I said, "Are you serious?"
Right.
So I went there several times, and I saw him how he worked. I sat with him in his booth, and then one day I went to Yankee Stadium, and I got there about 4:00, and I had a severe case of laryngitis. And the guy that runs the PA system out there, the board, his name was Mike Bonner. He said to me, "Rich, did Shep call you today?" And I said, "About what?" He said, "He wants you to, we want to make you fill in for him in case he can't make it. He's got a bad case of laryngitis." I was worse than him. So I went downstairs. They gave me tea and everything, and I sat with Bob that night. But he made it for the whole game, so I was never able to actually do it. But
Right.
I'll tell you a great Bob Shepard story. When I did the baseball show on WICC,
Yes.
we had a Bob Shepard contest, and people wrote in and said they would participate. One was former Shelton Mayor Mike Pacoda.
Okay.
And what I did was, to make it fair, I gave them each the same announcement to read. "Your attention, please, ladies and gentlemen. Now coming in to pitch for the Yankees, number 42, Mariano Rivera." Okay?
Right.
So Mike was one of the contestants. There was another guy from Stratford, another guy from somewhere else, up by Yukon somewhere. And they were all contestants. So I asked Bob Shepard, I said, "Bob, would you be one of the judges?" Because Bill Pucci and I, they were co-hosting that day.
Right.
"Would you want one of the judges?" He says, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I don't want to be a judge," he said, "but I will be one of the contestants."
Really?
But under a different name, an
Right.
imposter, you see. I said, "That's even better. This is fun,
Right.
So I never even told Bill Pucci. I didn't tell my wife about it. The only one I
Kept it
knew about
quiet.
was my producer, because he had to call Bob on the phone.
Right.
So each of the three guys did their Bob Shepard, imitations. And now we get Bob on the phone. We call him Walter from Rye, New York. And I says, "Walter, are you ready to play in the Bob Shepard game?" He says, "Yes." He does the announcement. Well, you got to see Pucci's face. Like, this guy's got to win. Who is this guy? He's great,
Right.
He thought it was Billy Crystal. He thought it was an imitation. It was the real Bob Shepard.
Right.
And so then after it was over, we said it was that. Not only that, but when Richie got married, my son Richie got married, Bob Shepard did the...
I heard about that, yes.
he did the opening. He did the wedding party.
He recorded it, right?
He recorded it
Yes.
at Yankee Stadium. He did the wedding party. And there was another wedding going on at the time. We were at the AquaTurf in Southington.
Yes.
And there was another wedding party going on, and people in the back room thought that the real Bob Shepard was in our room. We had people at our wedding thought he was in there.
Really?
And they were playing the Star Wars music, and Bob was announcing the wedding party. And now, for the first time, it was great,
See, right there, to me, that's probably the most rewarding thing for you, is that as a father, you got to make that wish happen for your son.
Absolutely.
Which I think, he'll remember forever, And
Absolutely.
that to me is why you do the stuff you do, because of moments like that, it's great.
I've been blessed. I have a
Right.
wonderful life. I'll tell you another story. Mel Allen. Mel Allen, the greatest Yankee announcer
yeah.
ever, probably, right?
Probably greatest announcer if you want to be.
Right.
Maybe Vince Scully's ahead of him, but that's about it.
This is a great guy. Anyway, Mel
Right.
Allen, without going through all the details, I did a lot of work with Mel over the years as a research writer and in different projects. Anyway, my wife was a member of the junior women's club in the Ansonia area, and they had a cancer fundraiser one year at the old Ansonia Mall.
Okay.
And I was doing the show here, a TV show in the late '70s at the time. And I said, Mel, would you come up to Ansonia with me and come to the fundraiser, and while you're here, do a taping with me for the show? He said, sure. So he came up here and did a taping. Then we went down to the Ansonia Mall, and then we got done with the mall, and he had a sister with him that day. We went to my father's house, and he sat with my father and mother and one of my father's friends and me for about an hour, hour and a half.
Oh, wow.
And I said to myself, how good is this?
Yeah, your father had to be in,
hog heaven,
right.
you know? And so so the people that I've admired in my life and idolized, I've gotten to know personally many of them, and it's been great. And they're human like anybody else.
And sometimes you worry when you meet somebody that you idolize, it might be disappointing. They
Right.
may not be what they seem. So when they are what you hope they would be, that's got to even make it better too.
That's right. I've heard stories about Mel being a drinker and this and that, and he probably did drink to a point. In front of me, he never took a drop.
Right.
Whether I've been to his house or he's at my father, never did. But look nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. All right, so I don't like to judge a man for those personal things.
Right.
I judge him for how you treat. One thing about Mel Allen, the same as Mickey Mantle, you could be Mike Cannici, or you could be, let's say you could be Michael Kay. Okay,
Yes.
If you were in the same room, he would treat you the same as he treated Michael Kay, who's a big-time Yankee announcer.
Right.
All right, I'll never forget one time I was in one of the Yankee offices, and Mel Allen was there, and he talked to me like I was a member of the New York Times. Bill White was another guy, great guy.
Oh, I loved Bill White. I loved him and Rizzuto. They were tremendous together.
I was around him one day with a bunch of New York writers, and I'm the only one that he called by name.
Really?
And that shows you that these guys, whether you worked for a small town newspaper or whatever, or whether you worked for the New York Times or Daily News, these to me is what's important, is you find out who the real people are.
Right.
And then you got your sure snobs too, don't get me wrong.
Definitely.
Okay? But I met some wonderful people there, and it's been a great experience.
Right. Now let's get into this. I find this very fascinating for anybody who's been a big fan of Yale football. You came out with a book in 2014 called A Bowl Full of Memories, 100 Years of Football in the Yale Bowl. Fascinating book. How long did you work on this project, and how did it come about?
Well, my father took me to the Yale Bowl in 1948. My father and his brother, my Uncle Len. You probably know my Uncle Len's son, Butch.
Yes.
My cousin
yes.
Butch coached Amity High here in Ansonia too.
Right.
And Butch wasn't even born yet. I was 5 years old. And another friend came with us. Every year from 1939 to 1957, Hillhouse and West Haven played in the Yale Bowl on Thanksgiving Day. Drew huge crowds. The day they took me, there were over 40,000 people there for a high school football game. So I don't remember anything about the game. I remember being there. I remember walking to the bowl. It was a cold Thanksgiving morning, bright, sunshiny morning, but I was overwhelmed by the sight itself, the Yale Bowl. Didn't go again until 1955. The first Yale game I ever saw was Yale Army, when the Army had a player named Bob Kayaski from Ansonia.
Right.
We all went as Army fans. I never saw a Yale game before. The year before, Army beat Yale 48-7. Bob scored 2 touchdowns. So when 55, I figured it was going to be a layup game for Army,
Right.
And Yale upset them that day 14-12. Yale won 14-12.
Wow.
I walked out of there crestfallen. I was really disappointed. But subsequent to that, my father would take me to the bowl on occasion, and I became interested in the Yale football history. And so from when I came out of college in '65, I've seen almost every Yale home game since. And one day, about 4 or 5 years ago, I began just jotting down some memories I had of going to Yale football games. Right. And one thing led to another, and it led to a book. And that's what happened.
And what's fascinating, too, about the book is sometimes people are always, known for one thing, no matter what it is, you're always going to be known for your work in baseball.
Right.
But it showed that, you could branch out and write about other things besides baseball. Mm-hmm. And, it's a great book, and people have had nothing but positive reviews about it. I mean, how rewarding was that book? And you've written 5, I believe, in your career?
6.
6. Where would you put that book as far as the ones you've done?
I would say maybe one of them. Well, it's hard to say because in the baseball books, I interviewed a lot of '50s players that were my bubblegum card heroes. I did it at an older age, and to become part of the Yale football family in a sense, have them accept me like they did, and to interview guys like Calvin Hill and Brian Dowling and John Pagliaro and Mike Sullivan, all these guys who I watched play over the years, Dick Giron. It was a thrill.
Right.
And so I made it really a human interest book. When I interviewed these guys, I said, look, I'll take care of the touchdowns and the extra points. I want human interest stories. Right. So I said, give me a story you would tell at a cocktail party. So I got a lot of good human interest stories, which I try to write the book in a sense of what it's like being a Yale football player or a college football player on the practice field, in the clubhouse, on campus.
Right.
Everything, not just the football itself. And history of the Yale Bowl, how it was constructed, how it was financed.
Right.
I try to get it all in one thing. And it's a 407-page book with 377 photos. So I was very proud the way it came out, too.
And how long did it take you to write it?
Well, about 4 years, but I had interviewed a guy let me get the date right. It might have been 1994. I didn't even realize I was doing a book at the time.
Right.
I was writing for Sportswriter's Digest. And his name was Al Osterman, lived in Woodbridge.
Right.
This guy, of the first 500 games in the Yale Bowl, he saw 499. He was there when the Bowl opened in 1914 as an 8-year-old.
Really?
The night before, he dug out a trench and piled it with leaves. Early in the morning, November 21st, 1914, when Yale opened the Bowl against Harvard, he snuck underneath the fence and got in the bowl early in the morning, probably the first fan ever in there.
Right.
And then people came in as the day went on. And I kept that. And I kept it in my file. I interviewed Carmen Koza prior to that, interviewed Rich Diana. So I used that stuff in the book, but not knowing I was doing a book. And then when I got into the book about 5-6 years ago in earnest, then of course, Al by that time had passed. Right. And I even one of the people I dedicated the book to was Al Osterman, even though he was deceased. Because anybody who goes to the Bowl that often was a pretty good Yale fan.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Now, another thing that you've been doing for a while now, which a lot of people love in the Valley, is the Legends thing that you host. Do you do that once a month? How do you...
I mean, Silver Sluggers?
Silver Sluggers, yes.
In 2006, Kathy Williams, the director of the Derby Public Library, asked me if I'd come over for 4 weeks for 1 hour. The guys wanted to talk sports with me. And I said, well, okay, but I said baseball is the main thing. And so we began in 2006, 1 hour a day. Right. Got longer and longer and longer. We're still there 10 years later. We've done over 300 sessions. We go every Thursday from 10 to 12, and we do one hot stove league session during the winter. So we're there every Thursday from 10 to 12 during the baseball season. We're called Silver Sluggers. Right. We get about 40, 50 every week.
Wow.
We mix the present with the past. Guys do presentations. I invite anybody out there who would love to come and join us. You're more than welcome.
People must love that, too.
Oh.
I hear so many great things about that, especially like the old-time baseball fans. I mean, they get a big kick out of that. And, that's what I mean, like right there is something like that, an hour a week. That's something that you give somebody who's
2 hours a week.
2 hour, yes, 2 hours a week. You give somebody who's been a long-time baseball fan, the opportunity to kind of be a part of something that's very cool, in my opinion.
And they get away from their troubles, too. We all have troubles.
Right.
This gives us 2 hours a week to be 12 years old again.
Exactly.
I love it, and it's a great time we have, and we have women who come. We have most of the people there are retirees. That's why we're called Silver Sluggers. We have silver hair, but we're going to take a trip to Cooperstown, May 3rd and 4th.
Okay, Rich. Rule ball has been a big part of what you've implemented into Major League Baseball. How did rule ball come about for you? It's been very successful, and it definitely shows teams stuff they probably didn't know about the game as much.
Well, in a sense, I'm a rules coach. My coaching background as a basketball coach, you see, in the winters I used to coach basketball, as you know.
Right.
And I didn't umpire baseball. So as a baseball umpire, we look in the baseball rule book and say, well, why aren't coaches doing this? Why aren't they doing that? You know, they can do it by a rule legally that they don't do.
Right.
And anyway, I always had this idea of doing a program that would be targeted towards coaches and players on all levels.
Right.
That in other words, to make them understand the rule book, because I learned where teams would lose games because of their lack of rules knowledge, and they would win games because of rules knowledge. So I remember one time being in Yankee Stadium or watching a Yankee game, and Enrique Wilson was playing third base for the Yankees, and he dove and caught a fly ball and fell into the stands, and it was a legal catch. However, the rule is when a player leaves the field to play like that and falls into the stands, the catch counts as long as he can show it to the umpire, but everybody gets one base. Everybody gets one base. So my point being is that does a player want to be that aggressive if the score is 1-1 in the bottom of the 8th inning, there's a runner on third, okay? Whereas you might make the catch if there's less than 2 outs, you'll get the out, but the run's going to score.
Right.
So you have to know that. So I remember 1 or 2 days later I was at Yankee Stadium and I saw Joe Torre. And I said, Joe, does Enrique know that that for instance, does he know the rule that when you fall into the stands, everybody gets one base? Because at the time, Toronto had a runner on base. He was advanced to base, which was no big thing at the time. He said, I'm not sure. He said, I'm not sure if he does or not. And I thought it was a strange answer. And then I realized driving home that he's never been told whether it's a rule or not. Right. And if you polled every Major League Baseball player, I'm sure most 98% would know that's a rule. So I learned from that, and then in 2004 in the winter, I called Brian, because Brian Cashman and I were pretty good friends. He used to read my columns a lot in Baseball Digest, he told me.
Right. And
he said to me, and of course I had written for Yankees Magazine, and so I said, Brian, what do you think about putting together a program with the Yankees in spring training about the rules? I think it's a great idea. Let me call Joe Torre, he said. So Torre was out in Hawaii at the time. He called Torre, and Torre said, yeah, I like the idea. So I submitted a program that they use in spring training. Subsequent to that, I was hired by the Red Sox, Astros, Diamondbacks the following season, and then my program, and then I would go to spring training camps personally.
Right.
And then now it's become a video program as well. And like, for instance, this year when I go to spring training, let me give you an example. A simple rule that players don't know about and teams don't know about, and it goes back to my days of the dead man scoring a run too, okay, is that if a player is injured during the middle of a play, as long as the ball's in dead ball territory, say it's a book rule double or a home run over the wall, as long as the ball is dead ball territory, if the player pulls up lame, say between first and second base,
yes,
he could just stop running right there, and the coaches should stop him from running, call time, put a substitute runner in, and that runner gets his base award. If it's a home run, runner then goes touch a second, third, and home.
See, I didn't know that.
Okay?
Wow.
Players, and I've got a whole line of them, I show them on video, okay, they'll keep running while they're severely injured. There was one player for the Mets a few years ago named Luis Hernandez, fouled the ball off his foot. He was tended to for 5 minutes. He was in severe pain, got back in the batter's box, hit a home run, ran around the bases. They found out his foot was actually broken.
Really?
You see?
Wow.
So my point being is this. There's a rule in the book that says you can put a substitute runner in. I called the Elias Sports Bureau in New York, and they told me that the substitute runner would get credit for the run scored, but the batter gets credit for the home run. You see? When the batters know that, they're gonna say time. They don't want the home run. So I tell the coaches and the GMs that I work with, you people put a lot of money into these guys, a lot of millions of dollars.
Right.
Why would you want to risk further injury when you have a book, when you have a rule in the rule book that protects the runner? I call it baseball's Affordable Health Care Act. You see?
Right.
Because it doesn't cost you a dime. All you got to do is know the rule and call timeout and put a substitute runner in.
Right.
So stuff like that. So this year when I go to spring training, I'll show them footage from last year, a Tampa Rays player named Kirk Casale.
Okay.
It's a home run, and he gets hurt just running first base, and he labors coming all the way home. And I'll tell them, look, if this happens to a player, call time.
Right. And
I work with the players too, with several teams that I work with. And I'll show them this. Stop running. Why risk further injury?
Right.
You get credit for the home run. Don't worry about that. It's going to be part of your stat. But don't risk further injury. Stuff like that. You know, then you had a play last year, remember in the playoffs with the Blue Jays and the Rangers, where the Blue Jays catcher Russell Martin threw the ball back to the pitcher lazily.
Oh, yeah.
hit the batter's bat. Shouldn't you choose bat? And Odor came in and scored from third. Umpire incorrectly called time, by the way. That ball should have been alive and in play.
Right.
And players need to know this. So even if you think that the umpire incorrectly calls time, run anyway. Run the play out.
Right.
And if you're a catcher, make sure you get a clear throwing path because the ball's live and in play. If you throw the ball, hit the runner's bat. Don't be so lackadaisical.
And how much time do you, like, say you talk to the Houston Astros or something like that, how much time will you spend on this with them going over these type of rules?
About an hour.
About an hour.
Hour to hour 15.
And I'm sure a lot of these teams, like, take something out of this. They benefit from, your seminars and stuff like that.
For instance, I'll tell you something right now, and the broadcasters give you more misinformation. It's terrible.
Right, yes.
No one knows the baseline. There's no baseline in the game of baseball until there's a tag attempt. So if you're the second baseman fielding a ground ball, I'm running the first to second, and I anticipate you're going to come and tag me like the 4-4-3. Right. I can run 8 feet that way. I can run 8 feet lower. Do whatever I want to do, and I'm legal.
Right.
If I'm going third to home, and there's a ground ball to the third baseman, if I want to run home in fair territory and get between the thrower and the receiver, I can do it. People don't. You watch. Most runners will stay in foul territory going from third to home.
That's unbelievable.
So if you're going from first to second on the 3-3-6 or the 3-6-3,
right,
or you're picked off at first, you're going to second. I tell people run at the shortstop's target.
Right.
Run it. Don't worry. But there is no baseline. Only time there is a baseline is when you're about to be tagged. Then you got 3 feet either direction. You see? Right. Okay. Now if you're in a rundown, there's a baseline at that point. Before a tag attempt, you got 3 feet. Every throw, you got a new baseline from where you are going to the bag. Right. So I try to clarify these things that no one's ever talked to them about.
Right. See, I'll tell you right now, half the stuff you said, I wouldn't even have known about. So, I learned something today, too.
We just scratched the surface.
Right. Rich, this was a lot of fun, and I just want to say to you personally that I've admired you for years and the stuff you've done. The books that you've written and like this rule ball right here, I think is a great tool for baseball. And like I wish you nothing but the best and applaud you for implementing this because I think this is great. And as a coach, what you instilled in these young men's lives and these young women's lives, that says a lot about you as a person. And the thing I admire the most is with all the success you've had, you're still a guy from Ansonia, Connecticut who appreciates where he came from and has never took any of that for granted. And it's been an honor to have you on today, and I really appreciate it.
Mike, thank you very much, and it was a pleasure being here, and I want to applaud you for a fine job that you did and how well prepared you were.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. So there you have it, folks. Rich Marazzi, a small town guy from Ansonia, Connecticut. He's done a lot of things in his life. He's been a teacher. He's been a coach. He's been an author. He's been a sports talk show host. That's just to name a few. He's implemented things for Major League Baseball, such as rule ball, which has been a big help to the game. But Rich Marazzi, the person, Rich Marazzi, the husband, and Rich Marazzi, the father, is what probably stands out the most because through it all, that's been what he's always been about, his family and the friends that he's known for years. For Hometown Heroes, I'm Mike Cannici. Good night, everyone.
At the end, that's most fun.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Thanks very much.
That's what stands out.